For thousands of years, the human skull has been this object of, both terror and total reverence. But what if I told you it was also a map to consciousness, drawn by two completely different groups of explorers, separated by 1,000 years?
So check this out. On one side, you have these ancient mystics who looked at the skull and saw the very seat of enlightenment. And on the other, you've got modern scientists who see it as, well, the bony case that protects the brain. But here's the absolutely incredible part. Their maps of what happens inside that skull are starting to look almost identical.
To really get this, we've got to travel back in time. We're going to ancient India to meet a pretty radical group of ascetics who put the skull at the absolute center of their entire universe.
They were called the Kapalikas, and that literally means the skull bearers. And listen, these weren't your typical hermits. I mean, just picture this. They lived in cremation grounds, they wore jewelry made of human bone, and they used an actual human skull as their ritual bowl. Their whole philosophy was built around this one incredibly powerful object.
So you can see how their thinking evolved over time. What started out as this really shocking external ritual was later reinterpreted by brilliant philosophers like Abhinavagupta. He came along and said, hey, the real skull isn't the one you're carrying around, it's the one you are. He meant your own cranium, the thing that's literally holding your awareness. And that was the crucial leap that connects their ancient world to our modern one.
So they had this kind of internal, sacred map of the skull. But what is truly uncanny is what happens when you put their map right next to a modern chart of neuroanatomy.
I mean, just look at this. The skull bearers, they identify this sacred gateway right at the crown of the head, the Brahmarandra. They said it was the soul's exit point. Now fast forward 1,000 years, and neurosurgeons use that exact same spot, they call it the bregma, as their primary landmark for brain surgery. One is a spiritual portal, the other a surgical one, but the location is identical. It's wild.
And the parallels, believe me, they do not stop there. It turns out the number 8 is a fundamental, sort of organizing principle for both the skull bearers and for neuroscientists.
Okay, think about this for a second. The human cranium is formed by 8 bones. Now, in a really stunning parallel, the skull-bearer tradition is centered on 8 main deities, or Bhairavas, and each one governs a different aspect of consciousness. And as you can see right here, their domains, everything from divine ecstasy to focused thought, they map so suggestively onto the very functional networks that modern science is identifying in the brain right now.
Now the parallels get even deeper, even more profound when we look at what the skull-bearers believed was flowing inside the skull. To them, it wasn't just a brain, it was the source of a divine liquid.
They called it amrita, which means the nectar of immortality. They believed this substance literally dripped down from the crown of the head, and that if you could preserve it through yogic practices, you could achieve enlightenment and even overcome death itself.
Sounds like pure mythology, doesn't it? Except your own brain produces about 500 milliliters of a very, very special fluid every single day.
This ancient, kind of poetic idea turns out to have multiple, very real biological counterparts. We've got cerebrospinal fluid, which literally flows from the top of the cranium downward. We've got powerful hormones released by the pineal and pituitary glands. We even have a neurotransmitter called anandamide. It's known as the bliss molecule, and its name comes directly from the Sanskrit word for joy. So in a very real way, the nectar is real. But what about the practices themselves? You know, what happens when you actually do what the skull bearers did and turn your attention inward to that space inside your head? Well, the results aren't just in your head, so to speak. They're physical. So there's this famous study by the neuroscientist Richard Davidson. He looked at the brain waves of long-term meditators, and what he found was incredible. During meditation, these yogis produced gamma waves, which are the signature of peak conscious states at an amplitude 25 times greater than the novices. Their brains were literally humming with a different kind of energy.
And it's not just some temporary state either. Research from Harvard showed that just 2 months of practice can physically change the brain's structure. It builds up areas related to learning and actually shrinks the fear center. This basically proves the ancient claim that these practices create altered traits, permanent transformations in the person practicing.
Okay, so this all builds to one final, absolutely astonishing parallel. It connects the ultimate goal of the skull-bearer path, which is liberation at the moment of death, to what neuroscience is just now discovering about the dying brain. The skull-bearer's ultimate goal was something called Kapala moksha, the soul's enlightened exit through the crown of the skull. For centuries, that sounded like a myth. But recent research has shown that in the moments after the heart stops, the brain doesn't just shut down. No, it erupts in this massive, highly organized surge of gamma waves, with activity that can actually exceed normal waking consciousness. It's a potential neurological basis for the near-death experience, and an unbelievable echo of what these guys were describing 1,000 years ago.
So what does all this mean? Well, it's not that these ancient mystics secretly knew neuroscience. The real insight here is it's way more profound. It's that two completely different methods of investigation, one that's deeply experiential, from the inside out, and one that's strictly empirical, from the outside in, can arrive at the very same truths about the nature of consciousness.
The skull bearers, they treated the skull as their laboratory, a vessel to be explored from the inside. And today, neuroscientists are doing the exact same thing, just from the outside in. The object of fascination, that ultimate frontier, it's never changed.
And that leaves us with one final, kind of tantalizing thought. If the map of the skull bearers lines up this closely with modern science, it just makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other ancient maps of consciousness are out there, just waiting for us to find the right way to read them?